Nissan Skylines. You think you know them, but you really don't. Behind me here, as many of you may know, is my 1991 Nissan Skyline GTR. Yes, I said GTR. It is an authentic GTR RB26, all that good stuff. I have owned it for a little over a year now, and boys, let me tell you, it has been a rough journey. I have learned a lot of things along the way, a lot of things that I didn't know before owning this car. And keep in mind, this was my dream car. Today, I thought it would be fun to go over a few things with this Nissan Skyline GTR that I have learned over the year of ownership that I didn't know before, and a lot of you guys don't know. I talk to people all the time. They tell me how much they love this car and they tell me things about it, and I'm just like, oh, it's really not like this. Like, it's a lot different than a normal car. It's completely different than what you think. Let's go ahead, jump right into it, and get to number one. This one is pretty obvious, but it's not as extreme as people think. This car is very, very expensive. Now, I'm not talking about the cost of the car. The cost of the car is just the cost in itself, but if you want this car to be reliable and hold a lot of power, you are going to be spending the money that you spent on this car over again. You are going to be spending this car's value on just the parts for this car. It honestly is insane how expensive parts actually are for this car. Let me just run you guys through a few things that you wouldn't think is expensive, right? So these side skirts over here, you guys can see how my side skirts don't fit perfectly flush. That is because I do not have OEM Nissan clips. There are little plastic clips that hold these side skirts in, and I just got these random ones from AutoZone. You actually have to buy the OEM Nissan Skyline GTR clips for the side skirts to sit flush with the car. They're plastic clips, kind of like these, but not exactly. These are like the push-in style ones. There's just regular clips that hold them in. They're just plastic, they're normal clips. Them boys is $100 per side. So $100 for the driver's side, and then $100 for the passenger side clips. It's $100 for plastic little clips. It's wild. I no longer have the OEM front bumper. It's actually just sitting in my basement. I actually have this bumper instead. You can't really see it on this bumper, but the OEM lip on the OEM bumper, brand new front lip for this car is like $700. It is very, very expensive, especially if you want to do it right. You guys can clearly see that my bumper doesn't really have the best fitment, and that's because it's not an authentic bumper. If I want to get authentic everything for this car, it's just way over budget. So not only is this thing super expensive, but this thing breaks constantly. There is always something breaking on this car, and you know, given its age, it is a almost 30-year-old Japanese car. It's going to break, but I don't think that people understand how much it breaks. I did not understand how much it breaks. I thought, oh, it's an old car, it's really not that bad. I've had a Jetta that was like 200,000 miles, like double this thing. That thing broke every once in a while, but it still kind of lasted me. No, this thing breaks. The more you drive it, the more it breaks. So I kind of just stopped driving it. Literally every single time I drive this car, I find something else that's broken, and I find that I have to replace this, or I have to fix this, or now I have to buy this. It just ends up breaking so much, and the parts for this car are so freaking expensive, man. It is a very expensive car to own. Whether it be suspension stuff or motor stuff or just anything, you end up spending a lot of money on this car because this car breaks constantly. Again, I promise you guys, it breaks much more than you guys think. It doesn't break like a normal old car. These cars are very, very delicate. I'm gonna burst a lot of people's bubbles here. This car doesn't feel all that cool. Like, just straight up being honest, if you hop in a 90s like Nissan Sentra or something, this thing kind of feels like that. They are fun. Don't get me wrong. They are fun. It's right-hand drive. It's a good motor. It's a fun car. It's a fun car, but it doesn't feel all that cool. Now, you can make it a very solid car. You have to redo the entire suspension. You have to redo all the bushings. To make this car feel good, you have to spend a ton of money on parts. Keep in mind, this car is a 90s Nissan. Things rattle, things are shaky. It doesn't feel like a solid car. When you're putting it in today's standards, obviously it's not completely fair, but I went from a 2017 to a 1991 Skyline GTR. Now, I'd rather stand outside of the car and just look at the car than drive this car. It rattles, it shakes. When you're going 40 miles an hour, it feels like you're going freaking 60. If you want this car to feel super solid, you're going to have to spend like 10 grand into suspension and bushings and all that good stuff. You kind of have to remake the entire car. Now, there are two parts as to why this car doesn't feel all that cool while driving. Now, this car was made for small people. I'm literally not all that tall. I'm about 6 foot, but this car is super hard to fit in. I don't know if you could tell the angle on the seat, but I'm like laying down while I'm driving. I have to basically lay down while driving to make sure that my head doesn't hit the roof. I have a low mount seat. I have low mount seat brackets. This thing is just, it's tiny. If you're somebody on the bigger side, this car isn't gonna be comfy at all. My one leg is constantly just sitting on the door, and then my other leg is just sitting right over here. This is like genuinely how I drive. A lot of people don't understand how small these cars actually are. They're very tiny. They're not the comfiest things in the world. I'm straight slouching in this car. Warning, this next reason might make a few people mad. Let me just get this out of the way real quick. I like my car sitting low. I know a lot of GTR owners don't like that. I like good fitment. I like all that stancy stuff. This car gives you all the problems of having a super low car, but at the inconvenience of it not even being freaking low. This is my iPhone 11 Pro Max. This is the big version. This thing full on fits underneath the car with some room to go. Like, that is wild, man. Yet I'm freaking tucking tired over here. I'm full on tucking in the front. My exhaust is nearly touching the ground. The whole underneath of the car sits lower than the body of the car, which I don't understand. It's not low, but I have all the problems of being low. If you want to have a little stancy boy action, this car is not the way to go. My fourth little thing about this car kind of ties in with the first thing. This car brakes a lot, and that is due to it being super ahead of its time. This car was one of the greatest cars ever made, and it's because this car was super ahead of its time. Just because it was super ahead of its time doesn't, it's always like holding the camera with one hand while putting up the hood prop is always like mad hard. Just because this car was ahead of its time doesn't mean that it's all that great. The RB26 was unarguably ahead of its time. It was one of the best motors ever created, but because it was so ahead of its time, it has a lot of little flaws. It has a lot of issues. Also with this car, something just as little as hike is four-wheel steering. They suck on these cars. Because it was ahead of its time, a lot of stuff doesn't last. A lot of stuff just sucks. It breaks a lot. This car is not a simple old Nissan. This car is very, very complex. That's a little tricky understanding this car. And if you live in the US, this car hasn't really been around for all that long, so information on this car is a little bit scarce. And now getting down to my final reason why I think this car is a little overrated and a little overhyped. It's so hard to find aftermarket parts for this car. I don't want to throw shade, but the people that mod these cars kind of don't really mod them. They kind of keep it all stock. I originally thought people just don't mod them that much because they like to keep their cars plain and simple, but the reason why people don't mod these cars is because there's not really aftermarket support for this car. These are like one of two headlights, and both the headlights that are available for this car are OEM. There's really no like aftermarket headlights. There's barely any aftermarket fenders. There is barely any aftermarket parts for this car, and like whatever parts do look good, they're kind of exactly the same as OEM parts, or they're just plain old ugly because they're out of date and out of style. When you find an aftermarket part that you like, kind of like this hood. I fell in love with this carbon fiber hood. I wanted it. I had to wait like 4 or 5 months for this freaking hood because it takes forever to get your hands on anything. Now, granted, motor stuff is a lot easier because the RB26 has become a popular swap in drift cars, so parts for the motor are fairly easy to find. But if you're talking about aesthetics or just plain old parts for this car, they're a little bit hard to find aftermarket parts for this car. When I bought this car, I thought that I could make it my own. I can make it very unique. And after trying to make it as unique as I can, it looks like almost every other GTR, man. I know it seems like this whole video I was just bashing on this car, but I just want to make it clear that I don't hate this car. It's a good car. It's a very unique car. I just want to make this video with a few things that a lot of people don't understand with these cars. A lot of people just say they want a Nissan Skyline GTR. I was one of those people. I just looked up to it because it's a JDM classic car, and I didn't really understand the car completely. I jumped into it and I actually experienced this car and I learned everything the hard way, and I just feel like a lot of people don't really talk about the downsides of owning a Nissan Skyline GTR. I just want to make this video for anyone that's thinking about getting this car. It's just a little warning. Just kind of watch out and expect these things because this car is not cheap. This car doesn't feel all that cool compared to newer cars, and it's gonna be very hard and very expensive to modify this car. I'm not bashing on the car. It's a very unique car. It's a very cool car. I just didn't build it to how it's supposed to be built. Unfortunately, I don't want to do that. So I probably am going to get rid of it. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure. I'm not 100% sure. I am looking into another car that I'm going to be adding because I'm tired of this thing. I'm tired of working on this thing. So like I'm looking into another car. We'll see what happens. I just wanted to kind of make this quick little video for you guys. Once again, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.